Welcome to the campus of the National Hispanic Cultural Center, and I would like to welcome you all to one of our programs in the La Canoa Legacy Talk that is a collaboration between the National Hispanic Cultural Center and the Center for Regional Studies. The Center for Regional Studies is dedicated to the creation of knowledge about New Mexico, the greater Southwest as a region, its connections to northern Mexico, Latin America, and Spain. The La Canoa Legacy Talks take their inspiration from the very word La Canoa, which can have several meanings. Here at the campus of the National Hispanic Cultural Center, we have a more modern rendition, an artistic rendition of La Canoa, which you can see to my right. The piece here reminds us, El agua es vida. We also want our talks to create knowledge, inspire action, bring practical and useful information to community members, specialized researchers, and others interested in the history, culture, sociology, politics, and religious experience of our region.
I'm going to introduce Michael, who's going to introduce Gabriel, but I just wanted to thank our HLA staff and volunteers and our crew who helped us keep this beautiful library just a wonderful venue. On your seat is some handouts about programming that we have. We're launching a range of new programming, so that's in the folded booklet. And you need to be loud. I didn't talk really loud. I need to. The next thing that's coming up on May 1st is a reading by Margarita Engel. She's a Cuban-American author, young adult author. She's the National Young Person's Poet Laureate, and she's going to come and read from a couple of her award-winning young adult novels. So if you have any young people in your life and who like to read, and I think all of us here like to read, please come along. And then there's a poem for your pocket, because this is National Poetry Month. And so April 27th is actually the day when we ask you to put a poem in your pocket, but we've been offering these every day of the month. There's about 8 different ones, so you don't have the same one most likely than the person next to you. But there's a basket in the hallway that has a bunch of them. And so please celebrate National Poetry Month with us that day. And then the last thing is there's a feedback form. If you have an iPhone, you can just scan the QR code. It'll take you right to the feedback form, and that takes less than a minute. Or you can fill these out and put them in the basket as you walk out. Because we're launching new programming, your feedback is really important to us so that we can hope to promise you high-quality events here at the center. And so if you can take less than a minute or so to fill out the form, either online or right there in paper. If you have an Android phone, I found out this yesterday, you have to download the free QR scanner if you're not familiar with that, which doesn't take long, and then you can do all of our evaluations on your phone. Save this paper, because it's Earth Day tomorrow, is that right? But either way, it's fine with us. So I think that's it from me, and so I'm going to have Michael introduce Gabriel.
Could you do something about that light so that it's not hitting all of us directly? Oh, yeah. It is really bright.
Yeah, so, and well, I'll let the crew take care of that, because we are video and audio recording that, so that's why. So if we can adjust that.
Thank you.
That one was in my eye, so I had them adjust that, and now it's in your eye. So.
Thank you.
Still looks white. The light's good, everything's good? Yeah? All right. So, first I want to reiterate the welcome already extended by my colleague, Valerie Martinez. As already mentioned, these events are co-sponsored by the National Hispanic Cultural Center and the University of New Mexico Center for Regional Studies. Many people like Valerie, at both the NACC and CRS, some of them who are right now working on the lights and busily thinking about those things, many people like them do a great deal to make these events happen each month. So right now I'm just going to ask that we give them a round of applause. So the Kanoa Legacy Talk Series features both academic and community research that considers both our region and our place in the world. Our friend Jose Rivera defined a canoa as a hand-hewn flume cut out of a large log designed to carry the water of the community organized in covered ditches termed acequias across an arroyo. In other words, canoas transport our community's traditional lifeblood and form an organic, integral, and integrating part of our landscapes, both human and natural. Those hand-hewn flumes, those hand-hewn collectively constructed objects are the guiding metaphor for this speaker series. Like a canoa, these talks serve our communities. We hope to provoke dialogue about the things important to us. This afternoon, I am delighted to introduce Gabriel Melendez. He really needs no introduction as you all know him well. He is deeply involved in our speaker series, in this one. But I'm going to introduce him anyway, as that's my job right now. Gabriel first wrote the concept paper for La Canoa and presented it to the NHCC director years ago. Gabriel is the director of the Center for Regional Studies at the University of New Mexico, and he is a distinguished professor of American Studies. He was the chair of that department when I was hired there 11 years ago. Moreover, the adjective of distinguished and distinguished professor is not simply my elaboration to say that he looks good. Rather, distinguished professor refers to the rank above full professor that very few of us ever obtain. To qualify for promotion to distinguished, one must be deemed a leader in his or her respective field, as attested to by a national and international reputation. Gabriel is truly a distinguished professor. I recall reading as a graduate student over 20 years ago his book, So All Is Not Lost, The Poetics of Print in Nuevo Mexicano Communities. At the time, I was told to read it by my professors in another state. I'm glad that they told me to read it. That book changed my thinking about Nuevo Mexicanos and Latinas and Latinos more generally, as well as it changed the thinking of many others about us. Gabriel is a creative writer and a key figure in the National Hispanic Literary Heritage Recovery Project. In closing, I suggest everyone read his most recent books, 2017's The Book of Archives and Other Stories from the Mora Valley. And by the way, if you ask him, he might sing something from it to you. And also read his 2013's Hidden Chicano Cinema, Film Dramas in the Borderlands. Today his talk will be A Lie Halfway Around the World, the Carl Taylor murder case. Please welcome Gabriel Melendez.
So thank you very much. Muy buenas tardes a cada uno de ustedes. Gracias por venir a esta plática. So this afternoon I'm going to do a fair amount of reading from the chapter by the same title, A Lie Halfway Around the World. I subtitled it today, The Carl Taylor Murder Case, a chapter in this book. So bear with me. I'm going to try and hit the high. This is a very dense chapter, includes a lot of information on this particular case, and it alludes to films that came before The Lash of the Penitentes and films that would follow. Matraca, right? Matraca. So matracas are used during Lent because bells are not to be rung. Anyway, so let me read, moving forward with this chapter. So this section is called Carl Taylor
adventurer, hunter, martyr. For the better part of 3 years, Carl Taylor had been living a less than harrowing life among Nuevo Mexicanos in the Sandia Mountain community of Cedar Crest, some 30 miles away from Albuquerque. Taylor came to New Mexico from Milltown, Indiana, in 1926 to pursue a master's degree in English at the University of New Mexico. He completed his studies in 1928 and took a position as an assistant professor at the University of the Philippines in Manila, where he taught for about a year before turning his attention full-time to his writings about out-of-the-way places. He returned to the United States in 1930 and spent 2 unprofitable years writing before returning to the Philippines to gather additional materials for his book, Odyssey of the Islands. Taylor took up permanent residence in New Mexico in 1933, electing to live in Cedar Crest, an early Hispanic settlement that until recent times bore the traditional name San Antonito. Did you see the Taylor with the on the javelina hunt? I hope you got a chance to see that. And this is Taylor emerging from the bush in the Philippines. Taylor's friends and acquaintances stirred further speculation in the press immediately following the murder, or his murder. The New York Haven Evening Register connected the dots. Taylor's friends said he had a penchant for penetrating primitive places for the subject of his writings. Dr. George St. Clair, head of the University of New Mexico's English department, told reporters that Taylor had discussed an article on the tribes of the interior of the Philippines. After that is published, I can never go back to the Philippines, he said. Taylor told him, with regard to this theory, an Albuquerque Journal article noted, quote, the manuscript has been sent to the publishers, and the idea that some person whose feet had been stepped on in the Philippines article had seen it and determined to kill the author regarding it as fantastic. While retribution from the distant Orient was considered implausible, the same skepticism did not hold for the penitente. The image of the traveler explorer risking life and limb among the barbarians completely shrouded Taylor. It was, after all, an image located at the center of the master narrative of the traveling anthropologist as cultural authority. And in 1936, it had the power to sway public opinion. It was especially potent when buoyed up, as it often was, by intensifying the elements of mystery, death, and drugs. This, then, was the story the print media chose to present to the national reading public. The example it held out of lurid spectacle and horror was highlighted by the fact that this story was happening in free America. Most recently, cultural critic Curtis Mares has lucidly shown how New Mexico in the 1930s faced a cross-current of social conundrums, each having the potential to drastically determine the future of the region, largely a consequence of the work of the artist colonies in Santa Fe and Taos. Tourists had come to be seen as the foundation of the state's future economic well-being. Away from the tourist centers of Taos and Santa Fe, the state was experiencing economic distress and chronic poverty, sharpened by labor strife that was in turn exacerbated by the Depression. The picture in rural New Mexico and other parts of the borderlands was one of labor strikes, red baiting, state repression of labor activity, and aggressive drug enforcement. Hispanic and Indian New Mexico was poverty-riddled, hungry, and destitute. And in an effort to keep the state safe for tourists, government and cultural leadership lumped their fears together and called for an all-out war on dope fiends, Bolsheviks, labor agitators, and immigrants. In this climate, all foreign others, and in the Southwest, this could easily mean Mexican or New Mexican-born brown people, could be turned into the criminal other. Carl Taylor had recently completed the monograph Agony in New Mexico. A copy was found neatly stacked and undisturbed on the table of the mountain cabin the night he was murdered. Agony would eventually be published in July 1936 in Today magazine, a move that allowed the publisher to cash in on the publicity surrounding the murdered writer. Like other tracts of popular journalism dealing with the penitentes, Taylor indulges in some degree of sensationalism about the Brotherhood. But the Today magazine article, if national news outlets were adverse to serving up fear and sensationalism to their readers, Hollywood stood ready to exploit those conditions. It is telling that Roland C. Price's other film achievements in 1936, the year that Lash was released, was the B-movie called Marijuana, for which Price did the camera work. Price's Marijuana does not have a New Mexico connection, but like Lash, it draws heavily on tropes of depravity and moral license. A standard disclaimer was required in all exploitation films from the period and was to be found in what industry insiders referred to as the square-up script, where filmmakers disavowed any aim to exploit the subject, declaring that, to the contrary, their sole mission was to educate by exposing a threatening menace in hopes that the public would stamp it out. The square-up was a kind of boilerplate statement into which the particular case for public outcry could be tailored to whatever social menace the exploitation film proposed to examine, be it a sex expose, a narcotic expose, or any number of threats to society. So Carl Taylor has finished this piece of writing in the Today magazine called Agony in New Mexico. But his writing is somewhat different than the writing of other of the same period. So I go on. Taylor had, in fact, opted to bring forth a deeper understanding of the religious faith he had witnessed in his penitente neighbors. He had specifically turned his sights toward trying to get the question of what their religion really is. In the course of the article, Taylor moves from trepidation to greater appreciation and empathy for the Brotherhood. Taylor opened the article by telling of his recent experiences in the Philippines. He begins, "On Easter Saturday 3 years ago, I stood beside a dusty lane in the Philippine Islands, busily photographing a strange procession." Taylor thinks to himself, "I'm glad to be going back to the United States where such things can't happen," only to find himself writing about a similar tradition just a few miles outside of Albuquerque. One maintained, to his surprise, by, quote, "the voting citizens of the Republic, who, upon recovering from their self-torture, would return to work upon the nearby projects of the New Deal." For Taylor, New Mexico was cause for him to rethink the whole matter of his formal education and to consider what had been left out of his school textbooks as he went about discovering how so much of the United States could remain unknown to him. His interrogations at one point become self-reflective in a way that is quite unusual in penitente writings from that period. So reading from that manuscript, he says, "My penitente neighbors are honest, simple, and cheerful people. Among them you will rarely see a dour face. Most of them possess a highly developed sense of community obligation. When someone is ill, a baby is born, or a corpse is to be laid away, there is no lack of neighborly assistance. When hunger stalks through the barren hills, everyone tightens his belt, that all may have a little to eat. The boy who chops wood for me, and who I think secretly cherishes an ambition someday to be elected the village Cristo, is immensely proud of his shiny new bicycle. Some of these people amuse themselves with radios, drive automobiles, get up by alarm clock, use lipstick and hair tonic, and take considerable pride in their mastery of current slang." This section is called Modesto Modestito, and it quotes from a corrido he was writing. "If you want to know my name, Just ask the jailer. News reports provide this picture of Modesto awaiting arraignment after being detained. Meanwhile, young Trujillo sits unconcerned, composing verses of a song in his jail cell. The verses are being written to a folk tune he has picked up from a friend before the murder. The one verse he shows officers when translated into English without the rhyme says, "If you want to know who I am, just ask the jailer. I am Modesto Trujillo, who has just come from San Antonio. Si quieren saber quién soy, pregúntenle al carcelero. Yo soy Modesto Trujillo, que viene de San Antonio, or San Antonito, not to be confused with San Antonio." Like his counterparts in the artist-writer community of Santa Fe and Taos, Taylor found it beneficial to hire the neighbor boy, Maria Trujillo's son, to do chores for him around the mountain cabin. Modesto spent most of his time chopping wood to heat the cabin and warm water for Taylor's weekly baths. Modesto was likely not a menace to his neighbors, but he did have a penchant for taking things that did not belong to him. Mrs. Ruth Finley, a school teacher at Gallup and one of the few females who kept company with Taylor, had misgivings about the boy. When reporters asked, she remembered sharing her apprehensions with Taylor on a visit to Albuquerque to take in the movie Tobacco Road. She says, "Isn't it strange? I warned Carl about that boy long ago. I said I didn't trust Trujillo, and I said I hoped he would let him go. But Carl only laughed and said, 'Oh, he's stolen things from me once in a while, but I think I have him in hand now. I'm not afraid of him.'" The mountain boy was a topic of conversation among Taylor's university friends for a good time after the murder. Thomas Pierce, an English professor at the university, knew something of Taylor's habits and sat down after the writer's death to pen some of his observations in his journal. He begins by describing how the news of Taylor's death reached his friends gathered at Carlisle Gym on the University of New Mexico campus, as the Art League's satiric ball was in full swing. The revelry is suddenly hushed as the news of Taylor's death filters among the partygoers. As Pierce has it, George St. Clair's party is gathered in a box on the balcony of Carlisle Gym, watching the spectacle below. The gymnasium is filled with milling crowds, donning paper hats and blowing whistles and horns. One of the evening's pageants, a satire on Russia, for which the local poet Witter Binner had just recited his clever poem, "Stalin, Stalin," all the while, is coming to a close. A group of men and women in tunics and caps stage as the dance and are joined by a machine-like figure that pirouettes and parades around an allegorical mock-up of the, quote, 5-year plan. Before a masked dancer portraying Stalin, and then suddenly a visibly agitated Carl Reddin runs through the gym and rushes up to the box to speak to St. Clair, but the noise of the revelers makes it impossible to hear what he is saying. Seconds later, St. Clair turns to Pierce. Quote, "Carl Taylor has been murdered at his cabin in the mountains. The sheriff has just confirmed the report." Unbelieving, I could only repeat, astonished, "Murdered?" And Saint again said, "Murdered. He's been murdered." Pierce continues, "Now 7 days after the facts are known, after speculation has run the gamut from motives of revenge by the penitentes to more personal complications, the truth is stranger than all else. But perhaps because Pierce could not possibly know the most intricate details of the truth, he reflects on the tremendous irony in the fact that Taylor, the globe-trotting travel writer who has faced headhunters, wild tribesmen, hobos in slums, and gangs of thugs on waterfront, should be killed while sitting and reading a newspaper in front of his fireplace by a Mexican houseboy whom he trusted to prepare his bath and warm his cabin. As he waited in jail, Modesto had let himself be photographed by news agencies, and photos of him circulated in the local and national press, each shot presenting him in a different guise. A Paramount News cameraman was sent from Los Angeles to take talking pictures of the boy and of his jailer, Sheriff Ross Salazar. DA Marby ordered that the footage be destroyed when, according to a news report, Sheriff Salazar balked at some questions the cameraman was to ask. The papers reported that the Paramount cameraman would still be permitted to film the crime scene and the boy, with the proviso that the filming would not compromise the investigation by discussing the details of the case. Had the movie film not been exposed, we might have even heard Modesto singing his corrido. Fortunately, several of the still photos taken of Modesto were published and survive. In one, Modesto is standing with Sheriff Ross Salazar before a jail cell, looking every bit the part of the outlaw Billy the Kid. In another photo, Modesto is holding a cigarette to his mouth, Pachuco style, looking every part of the incorrigible Chicano dope fiend. In a couple more, Modesto is seated across from his interrogators, visibly frightened and appearing as though he had just come to understand the enormity of what had happened. In the days before his sentencing, the papers reported that Modesto appeared unmoved and unrepentant as he worked on a beaded belt and, quote, ate and slept well and was apparently unworried. But after being sentenced, he broke down and cried in his cell. In public, Modesto kept a stoic face, and so too, it seems, did his parents. On February 18th, the Albuquerque Journal noted, quote, the boy who will reach his 16th birthday next Saturday did not seem affected while in court chambers. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Jose Leon Trujillo, were among the spectators and seemed rather stunned and bewildered, but gave no outward signs of emotion. What more could be expected of a boy in his predicament? As it was, Modesto was displaying an amazing range of emotions and thoughts, as photos of him reveal. He was alternately polite, stoic, resigned, filled with bravado, or filled with anguish. In all likelihood, he had felt each of these different emotions as he faced his accusers and an uncertain future. Nowhere is the range of sentiments better represented than on the day Modestito, surely his mother would have called out to him in this way, was being transferred to the New Mexico State Prison in Santa Fe. Modesto put on a good face for the media, but also let the public in on experiences that were already pointing him toward the life that someone of his ethnicity, class, and religion all too frequently met. It's surprising to learn that by the time he was 15, Modesto had already tasted the hard life of being a migrant worker, something that he found matched his current circumstances as a convict of the state of New Mexico. He's quoted in the paper as saying, "This reminds me of the time I hitchhiked and bummed train rides to California." Modesto Trujillo, 15-year-old slayer of Carl Taylor, said Tuesday as Sheriff Ross Salazar and two deputies were taking him to state prison in Santa Fe to begin a 99-year sentence. Modesto said, "I worked in the tomato fields out there," the boy continued, "and it was hard work and the sun was hot. The boy had a box of candy given him by a friend and offered the officers some, but they declined, thinking that it might be a long time before he had any luxuries. The boy's eyes grew misty at times as he apparently realized he was taking his last automobile ride and enjoying the last look at the Sandias, which were his home since birth, for perhaps the remainder of his life. But he did not shed tears as he had when he bade his mother goodbye. The sheriff said the boy was brave about the ordeal of entering the prison, where he would spend his 16th birthday next Saturday, February 19th, 1936. Modesto's family did not abandon him. The visitors register for the New Mexico Penitentiary logs the visits of large parties of family members visiting Modesto in July and October of 1936. 3 years into his sentence, residents of Cedar Crest and other mountain villages drafted and circulated a petition asking that Modesto be pardoned and allowed to return to his home. The petition dated August 14, 1939, includes the signatures of 138 individuals. That the list should include both Anglo and Spanish surnames suggests that local sympathies outweighed the image of Modesto in news reports as a fiend and Anglo-hating monster. The petitioners asked Governor John E. Miles to use his office to intervene in the matter, believing that Modesto had been punished enough. Despite the fact that a month later the New Mexico Board of Parole denied a request for parole, family members continued to write Governor Miles and subsequent New Mexico governors asking for clemency in the case. Modesto would serve 9 years of his original sentence of 99 to 100 before it was commuted in February 1945 to 25 years to 99. Modesto received a conditional release from prison in October 1946, and his sentence was commuted twice more, once in July 1948 and again in August 1949. After serving 16 years, he was finally discharged from the prison system in January 1951. This is a letter from a high school student who lived in Old Town, and it's a member of the Jinso family. This Jinso family were connected to folks in the East Mountains, right? They had relatives on that side of the mountain. She's writing to Governor Miles, and she says, "Dear Mr. Miles, to be the first year of me to vote and to really make my folks turn there to your side. Yes, sir, we go for Governor John Miles. He keeps his record straight, and I swear that you will give me no good answered for this question. Mr. Miles, why do I read in the papers that you, Mr. Miles, are doing so much for the prisoners? I guess I see every prisoner's name in that paper. I read it about 150 times to see if I can see that in that long list, this name, Modesto El Trujillo. Everybody says you are doing so much for them. Why, and can't you do something for him? Please, Miles, answer my questions and make them good." So the petitioning work went on and included members of the family and so forth. And here's a young high school student who obviously her first language is Spanish, right? So she's having difficulty. And there's a certain informality to the letter as well. So the shallow mysteries, such as the district attorney Marbury alluded to in the Santa Fe New Mexican, linger. He said the boy had in his possession a new bicycle and a camera and other articles believed to have been stolen for the reason that the boy had no money with which to purchase these things. If the items mentioned were indeed stolen, and if some of the goods belonged to Carl Taylor, then quite naturally, this would have damaged the master-chore-boy relationship and turned it towards its tragic ending. But it is likely that the bike was not stolen, since Modesto had no qualms about riding it through the village, giving the impression that he was, quote, immensely proud of his shiny new bicycle. Perhaps Carl Taylor bought him things or lent him things, just as he had let him dress up preppy style and pose for the photo for the article he was writing. Perhaps Modesto felt that the items he had gotten from Taylor were his to keep. Perhaps Carl Taylor could not bring himself to ask his impoverished neighbors to return the lent items. We do know that Taylor had no qualms about issuing an occasional reprimand to Modesto by speaking harshly to him. The intricate and complex master-chore-boy relationship the case denotes is material of deep and complicated socio-historical significance. Too profound, unfortunately, for the makers of the exploitation film Lash, who in their haste to turn a buck forever barred the human dimensions of this tragedy from the film, driven as they were by their need to exploit the penitentes and, quote, the marijuana-minded Mexicans. That quote comes from, I think, from a newspaper in Cleveland describing the people of the East Mountains here. So I hope I didn't overtax your patience by reading so much of the chapter, but it took a lot of work to put the chapter together, and I would rather prefer to read kind of the condensation of ideas than to dismember it by just sort of doing a PowerPoint. So thank you. We might be able to have some footage from Lash to take a look at. So keep in mind that the movie is turning the material of the accusations into a sensationalist B movie that also went viral, we would say today.
Say, hombre, where's the hotel around here? Pretty little town, isn't it?
Yes, senor.
I don't like hotels. Do you think you can find me a cabin around here somewhere?
Oh, see, on top of the mountain. Very nice little cabin.
Is it expensive?
Well, not too much.
Let's go see La Morada first here.
By the way, what's your name?
My name Chico.
Chico, huh?
Si, senor.
You look like a pretty nice boy. Would you like to work for me?
Si, senor.
Well, look, I'm going sightseeing with those people to La Morada. Go up and find the cabin, make all the arrangements, and I'll meet you right here. How's that?
Si, senor.
The altar is a very primitive one. Their hand-carved gruesome idols are set in places of honor. They reverence this figure, and to them it has a sacred halo around its head. One can see where a little whitewash and a few lines of black paint have given the desired effect. It takes many months. It is an age-old story that their dance portrays. Man with religious tolerance and forbearance must overcome the 7 deadly sins before the way of salvation will be open to him.
Qué bonita música, ¿no? Qué bonito bailan. Mira, qué bonito bailan, eh?
Each floral decorated baton representing one of the sins, vainglory or pride, avarice, gluttony, lust, sloth, envy, and danger. These form the bridge of sin that man must cross unscathed, or the soul of the sinner remains forever stained and deprived of grace until he has been restored by penance.
He is the hermano mayor, head of La Morada, our church.
But why the whip?
Soon after the dance, the dancers will go to the Morada and do penitence.
And do they whip themselves?
Oh, si. The hermano mayor will give them each 5 lashes.
You think you can fix it for me to see it?
Oh, no, senor. It is too dangerous. I would be expelled from the Morada and maybe to Calvario.
Chico, I can pay you well.
Oh, no, senor. I have been working for this writer. He paid me good. I did not think I could hurt our belief by showing him a La Ceremonia. You know what to do.
Pedro, Teófilo, síganlo.
last it's finished. Oh!
Hey, Jackie! Here's an extra for you.
Extra, Fitz! Ryder murdered! You got it wrong. Penny Ryder murdered. Don't you ever read? No, I just Wait, Jackie, who are the Penitentiaries? Well, we're just some kind of a no Indian now. Here, go say your paper. Extra! Read all about the murder! Read all about
the big murder. Read about it.
Penitentiary, Ryder murdered. Who are the Penitentiaries? Have you ever heard of them?
It's just a strange country, I think.
You would say that.
Well, I never heard of Ethiopia until Mussolini went over there.
Don't you ever read?
Yes.
Wake up, America. Here in our own country, we can see the very heart of Africa pounding against the ribs of the Rockies.
So three different scenes from the film. The Mac, who is Taylor, arrives in Taos and meets Modesto or Chico, and the action gets going there. And then there's the sequence of the murder, and then the aftermath, which is a very interesting. This is a very interesting conclusion to this film. One is you see the press churning out the, acting as part of the agent of churning out the sensationalism that is both the film and the news reports. And some of this language comes directly from Charles Lummis, particularly the very last line in that sequence. It says, we're in the heart of, we're seeing the heart of Africa beat up against the Rockies. That's something that Charles Lummis had written in the 1890s about the Southwest. So it's all kind of draws out this sensation. And then the gravitas of the narrator's voice, it's pretty heavily leads us into some conclusions ahead of time about what New Mexico villages are like. Anyway, I may be able to fill in some gaps through your questions and comments about the chapter.
Origin of that.
I think it's more geared to the Southwest and this idea that the Southwest still had these overlays of primitive peoples that were like the African continent in some ways, and operating through Charles Lummis' way of thinking about the Southwest was something called Orientalism, where everything exotic and different and foreign was turned into this trope of Orientalism, which is like the Middle East and Africa. And but it's very strange. Even when Lummis said it, it was pretty strange to figure out what did he mean, right? But I think he's referring to barbarism, things like that.
I don't even think he was aware that the Southwest, probably a lot of the people originated in the Iberian Peninsula, and they even put those two together. Because I think that a lot of riders, people that came to New Mexico, either to write or paint or whatever, they came with a preconception of a very primitive, people that really they couldn't even pinpoint where their origins were. And even if they were indigenous people that they wrote about, the very fact that these people were able to build huge pueblos and sustain a way of life did not make them barbarians.
I agree. I think what the film is doing is just playing up that
Well,
thing
it's
for
almost
sensationalistic
like-
purposes.
It's almost like that other film that DeMille did, which was Birth of a Nation. You know, and this was put out there so that people really came here thinking that we were barbarians.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, Hollywood is going to turn a buck wherever it can, and if it's going to do it this way, it'll do it this way, and yeah.
Talk about the Matachines.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's another interesting, curious, the way
they depict them. I mean.
yeah, the way the film opens is that there is footage being taken in New Mexico, and that of the Matachinas is probably from Taos.
Well, the Pueblo, actually, the ruins, that is a Taos Pueblo.
And yeah, you see the ruins of Taos Pueblo where the Battle of 1847 took place, 1848. And what's happening, so there's these sort of touches of authenticity that the film plays with. And against that is sort of this, again, I hearken back to that deep gravitas of the narrator who's like taking us into this mystery and foreignness and otherness and so forth. So, but that footage looks to be something, we should ask Enrique if that could be authenticated back to the 1930s in Taos, because it's really funny footage, you know, with the masks and this kind of like, yeah.
I don't think they could possibly choreograph that. It seems like they're just taking advantage of a local Matachinas performance. Is my impression. I don't think they would know enough about the topic to get into it that far. The mass figures of the abuelos, that's very common. But one comment I had was, okay, here's Lomas, a travel writer, making these comparisons with Africa, but then there's a supposed anthropologist, Captain Bork, who worked in Texas and documented the first Pastores play in the Rio Grande Valley down there, and then he came out to San Rafael and continued his work, but he was very impressed with the Rio Grande Valley and first was comparing it to the Nile Valley, and here these grand civilizations here, and he became so jaded in his work that he changed the description, and he said that he was wrong. It wasn't like the Nile; it was like the Congo. And so we have this is the 1890s also. So
Yeah.
it's definitely part of the language of that decade.
Yeah.
Darkness.
Teresa?
I want to know what became of Modesto after he was released from prison.
You know, when I was writing the book, I was calculating that he might be about 86, 87-year-old, something like that, 88, if he was still in the East Mountains. So I asked about for him. I asked many, many families, and no one could come up with Modesto Trujillo. Maybe I didn't ask the right people. After he's released from prison, it's sort of, he just goes back into the community, and we really, you know, he doesn't stand out in any way that I can see. I really was hoping that he would be there because I wanted to interview him.
Well, in 1936, he was 16.
Yeah, he was the youngest person to be sent up to the state prison at the time.
Were you able to get any of the transcripts from the court hearings and the sentencing and his time?
Only as was reported through the newspapers, mostly the Albuquerque Journal. And my thought was, you know, there were two people in the cabin when he was killed, Carl Taylor and Modesto, right? And the moment that he's killed, it's not as you see in the movie where he's typing away at the manuscript. The way it's reported, the crime happened as Taylor was getting ready for his bath, maybe in the bath, and Modesto came up on him with a pistol that someone had given him. So I thought to myself, there might be some court proceedings in terms of the sentencing and all of that wasn't reported in the newspapers, and I'm sure that exists. But I thought to myself also, well, the other voice is going to be missing, the eyewitness, or Carl Taylor,
But the defense attorney would have had a motive, and they never established a motive, as far as I can see.
The newspapers reported that the motive was robbery. And Modesto himself said, this again through the newspapers, that he had come down with Carl Taylor to, it was before, keep in mind, it's before ATM machines, right? So he comes down to Carl Taylor and he goes into the bank and withdraws some money because Taylor is going to make another one of these trips off somewhere across the globe to do some other work. And that he had, he had sort of decided that's the motive that Modesto gave. But we don't know what happened in the moment between them in the cabin during this ritual bathing that happened regularly.
Did he have a jury trial?
No jury trial.
So he just went before the judge?
And was sentenced. The district attorney and he was found guilty of murder. And there was a confession.
First degree murder?
First degree murder.
He confessed then?
He confessed. He confessed that he killed Taylor.
Yeah.
And the motive was robbery, ostensibly.
Was the Lash of the Penitente shown here in Albuquerque? And how did people react to it? That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, how did you first learn about it?
Two good questions. First question is easier to answer in the sense that I never discovered any indications that the film was screened locally and that it would have had any response from anyone. Here's something ahead of the making of the film, or at the moment in which it's being made, is Governor Marby. It was Clyde Tingley. Clyde Tingley was aware that this film was going to be made, and that it had some nudity, which what's left of the film breaks off, so there's some scenes that are missing, which may be the nude scenes, right? Another sort of titillating part of the film. And Tingley said this was the motive was not the Hermandad. The Hermandad was not involved. It's pure sensationalism, and I'm going to ban the film. So that was registered in the newspapers. What the public saw, or if it ever was screened here, is a question I can't answer. I doubt that it would have been screened, because there would have been some kind of outcry from local communities. And the second question, where did I learn about it?
Yeah.
I think it was when I was at the University of Utah, and I used to go through these film, looking for material on Chicano film, and I think there was a copy at UCLA that I happened upon. Yeah. But obviously, the only place that I know of that sort of kept memory of this alive was down at Mazel's Trading Post down here on Central. So if you ever went into Mazel's Trading Post, they had some of these clippings from newspapers for the Carl Taylor murder case. Now, I don't know if they had a family connection to that or what, but somebody told me about that. And then later I went and I saw for myself that they were there, yeah. So I learned about the Carl Taylor murder story through that source, and I can't tell you who that was, but it had something to do with the Mazel Trading Post, yeah. I try not to forget these things because they could turn into a chapter, right, if you pursue them enough. Yes?
was wondering about the burning cross,
Yeah, yeah.
because that's a Scottish tradition, isn't it? The burning cross.
I would have known. I wish I would have known that when I wrote the chapter. I was thinking about the KKK and the burning of crosses, right?
Diana Gabaldon talks about that in the research she did for her novels, that in Scotland, before they would go to battle, they would take a burning cross around from village to village to get the troops going to battle. And then that was brought to the New World. That's where it started.
Yeah.
But I
Well, there are no New Mexican equivalents of that happening. There's just that's never been a part of New Mexican sort of expressions of any sort.
So it was sort of to enrage people or get people excited.
It's to get their it's to get their to get them agitated, and to think about all these constructs of the unknown that may be threatening American life, mainstream American life. And here's another instance of that. And then the burning cross is like a gratuitous. I don't know who came up with that. We'd have to, but it's a real disconnect from New Mexico, and it's funny to see it here.
Unfortunately, films like this is all that a lot of Easterners had as a view of the Southwest, particularly New Mexico, the northern part, where it's a little isolated up there, and they came with total
It's the power of popular culture going out from here with a story like this and depositing that the only bit of information that people would have gotten, unless they're historians or in some class thinking about the history of the Southwest, would have been what they would have seen through their eyes and experienced in a movie theater. So that's where there's nothing to counter that view among a general public. Say, think of the young newspaper boys there, or the couple at the end, right, who are wondering, what is this story about? And all they have is what's in front of them. And the same would have been true for the viewing public. So those kinds of impressions would have taught something, even at a great distance from the region that we're talking about. It would have deposited some kind of imagery and imagination, and we can see that that's pernicious. That can have pernicious effects. Very good. Well, thank you all for being here.